Have you ever wondered why some people just don't seem to like you no matter how kind or genuine you are? You try your best and you're polite. You're supportive, you do everything right. Yet, behind closed doors you hear whispers, feel the coldness in a room, sense the hidden resentment. Why? Before we dive deep into this uncomfortable yet life-changing topic, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. We're all about growing wiser, stronger, and calmer, one video at a time. And trust me, you'll want to watch this video all the way through. Because by the end, you'll see your relationships and your entire love life in a very different light. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers and Roman emperors, once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Today we're going to use that ancient wisdom to uncover 9 reasons why people secretly hate you, and also learn from 10 of Marcus Aurelius's most powerful suggestions on how to handle it with grace, wisdom, and unshakable calm. Because the truth is, some people will dislike you for reasons that have nothing to do with you, and everything to do with themselves. But knowing why it happens, and how to remain untouched by it, that's where real power lies. Reason 1. Your confidence intimidates them. Do you remember the first time you truly fell in love? Not the casual kind, not the high school crush or the fleeting attention from someone across a room, but that real, soul-shaking deep love? The kind where one look from them made your whole world slow down and speed up at the same time? Now hold on to that memory. Picture that moment. Where were you? What did it smell like around you? What song reminds you of that time? Was it a chilly evening with soft music in the background? Or a hot summer afternoon where their laughter felt like water on fire? That version of you, the one who loved fully, fearlessly, and gave their heart without knowing if it would be held or shattered, that version still exists. And that version was confident. Because love, real love, requires confidence. To open up, to be vulnerable, to be seen and still say, "This is me." Now here's the twist. That same confidence, that same light you carry when you walk into a room, that same strength behind your eyes, the one that once attracted them, it can also become the reason they secretly start to hate you. Strange, right? But it's true. See, confidence is beautiful, but it's also terrifying to the wrong people. You walk in, not needing validation. You speak your mind calmly, not to dominate, but because you've done the inner work. You radiate presence. You don't try too hard. You're just real. And that kind of self-assured energy, it makes the insecure deeply uncomfortable. It reminds them of what they don't have. It shines a light on their inner chaos. And instead of saying, "Wow, I want to rise to that level," they start to resent you. They start to look for cracks. They whisper things like, "Oh, they think they're better than us." Or worse, they try to dim your light just to feel brighter themselves. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're in love. You give, you support, you uplift. But slowly they begin to criticize you for being too much. Too confident, too direct, too calm, too passionate. And one day you wake up wondering, why do they seem colder now? What did I do wrong? The answer? You didn't do anything wrong. You just stayed true to yourself. And sometimes that's all it takes for someone to secretly turn cold. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." So no, you can't change how someone reacts to your light, but you can choose to keep shining anyway. Because the right person, the one who sees you as a mirror of their own potential, they won't fear your confidence. They'll fall in love with it. So I ask you again, do you remember your first love? Now ask yourself, were you ever truly seen? Or were you just tolerated until your light became too bright? Think about it, and stay with me, because in the next part, we'll talk about how even your refusal to play the victim can make you a target, and what Marcus Aurelius would say about that. Reason 2, you don't play the victim. Have you ever been in love with someone who just couldn't stop talking about how the world was against them? Every time something went wrong, it was always someone else's fault. Their ex was crazy. Their boss hated them. Their friends never supported them. And at first, maybe, you felt bad for them. You wanted to fix them, save them, be their safe place. But slowly, didn't it start to feel exhausting? Now flip the script. Imagine you are the kind of person who takes ownership. You don't blame your past. You don't cry poor me when life gets tough. You look at challenges and think, all right, what can I learn from this? Now, what happens when a person who lives in victimhood falls in love with someone like you? At first, they admire you. They're drawn to your strength, your accountability, your mindset. You're the calm in their chaos. But over time, your refusal to blame the world starts to intimidate them. It makes them feel small, weak, exposed. Why? Because when you say, "I messed up, but I'll fix it," they feel like they're being held up to a mirror. And they hate what they see. You become a silent reminder that they could have taken control of their life, but didn't. That they could have healed, but chose to stay wounded. That they could have taken responsibility, but preferred sympathy. And the moment you stop validating their victim story, they turn cold. Let me bring this closer to home. Think about your last love. Did you ever find yourself shrinking just to make them feel okay? Did you ever feel guilty for doing well? For being at peace, for not constantly complaining? Did you stop sharing your wins because they always turned it into a must be nice for you moment? That's not love. That's emotional manipulation in disguise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, stop waiting for life to be fair. Stop hoping people will understand your growth. Do what's right, even when it's lonely. Because here's the truth. You were never meant to carry someone else's wounds just to make them love you. And if someone secretly hates you for not playing the victim, that says more about their journey than yours. You are not responsible for anyone else's healing, but you are responsible for protecting your peace. And believe it or not, your peace might be the very thing that ends a relationship, but that's okay, because love without growth, that's not love, that's codependency. So, tell me, have you ever loved someone who made you feel guilty for your strength? If so, you're not alone. Stick around, because next, we'll talk about the uncomfortable truth of why setting boundaries makes people resent you, even in love. Reason 3, you set boundaries. Have you ever been in a relationship where you started off giving everything, your time, your energy, your love, and at first, it felt magical? You were there for them at 2 a.m. when they couldn't sleep. You dropped your plans just to make them smile. You answered every message, picked up every call, forgave every mistake, because you loved them deeply. And in the beginning, that love felt like a fairy tale. But slowly, something shifted. You started noticing how much of you was being chipped away, how you were showing up for them more than they ever showed up for you, how every time you said no, even gently, they looked at you like you just betrayed them. And so one day you did something that scared even you. You said, "I need space." You drew a line. You made a boundary, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself too. And that's when it happened. Their mood changed. The warmth vanished. The silent treatment began. Suddenly you were distant, selfish, cold, all because you had the courage to say, "I matter too." Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Setting a boundary isn't wrong. It's the most honest thing you can do, for them and for yourself. But the hard truth? Some people don't want a partner. They want a lifeline. They want someone they can lean on, without ever standing up for themselves. And when you stop being that emotional crutch, they hate you for it. Not loudly, not always openly, but in quiet, passive ways. In their withdrawal, in their sarcasm, in their growing coldness. Because you dared to say, "This is where I end and where you begin." Let me ask you,
have you ever felt guilty for needing time alone?
for turning off your phone for a night? For saying, "Not today, I need to take care of myself"? If you have, you've loved someone who was in love with your availability, not your soul. And when you stop being endlessly available, the love starts to fade, or so it seems. But here's the deeper truth. Anyone who sees your boundaries as rejection was never truly embracing you. They were embracing your silence, your obedience, your sacrifice, and you were slowly losing yourself. But not anymore. Because now you know, real love doesn't punish boundaries and it respects them. So if someone secretly hates you for choosing yourself, let them. You weren't put here to be consumed. You were meant to be cherished. And if that makes them uncomfortable, so be it. Because in the next part of this story, we're going even deeper into the reason why your authenticity can make people walk away. Reason 4, your authenticity makes them uncomfortable. Have you ever loved someone and shown them all of you? Not just the polished version, but the raw, unfiltered truth, the weird quirks, the vulnerable stories. the pain you've carried in silence for years. You trusted them. You told them about your childhood. The betrayal, the dreams that scare you. You didn't wear a mask. You let them see your soul. And for a while it felt like they loved you even more for it. But then it started changing, didn't it? They started pulling away. Not with drama, but with indifference. They stopped asking questions. Stopped listening deeply. Stopped holding space for the real you. And you were left wondering, did I do something wrong? Was I too much? Let me tell you something no one else might say out loud. You weren't too much. You were real. And sometimes, people secretly hate you for that, because authenticity forces them to face their own masks. See, the moment you show up fully as yourself, you challenge others to do the same. And most people aren't ready. It's easy to love someone who plays along, who pretends, who says the right things and never ruffles any feathers. But you spoke the truth even when it trembled in your throat. You shared how you felt, not for attention, but because connection matters to you. You didn't play games. You didn't hide. And to someone who's still afraid of their own reflection, that honesty is threatening. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one, and you've tried. Not perfectly, but honestly. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been in love with someone who only wanted the nice parts of you? They loved you when you were funny, when you looked good, when you were easy to handle. But the moment you got real, when the tears came, when the silence got heavy, when the conversations got deep, they shut down. Why? Because you weren't performing anymore. You were just being, and not everyone can handle that. Because when you're authentic, there's no place for them to hide. They have to confront their fears, their insecurities, their lies, and some people would rather lose you than face themselves. But here's the thing, your authenticity is not a flaw. It's your superpower, and the one who's meant for you. They won't flinch at your truth. They'll lean into it, because they'll recognize it not as a threat, but as home. So if someone walked away, because you were real with them, let them. You didn't lose love. You lost an illusion. And in the next part of this story, we'll explore a truth even more painful, why your emotional independence can actually make them feel unwanted. Reason 5. Your emotional independence makes them feel unwanted. Have you ever loved someone so deeply, but still felt like you didn't need them? You loved their presence. You enjoyed their company. You shared your world with them, not because you were empty, but because it was overflowing. And for a while, it was beautiful. They admired your strength. They said things like, "You're so grounded. You're different. You don't depend on anyone." But somewhere along the way, that admiration started turning into resentment. Suddenly, your peace felt like distance. Your calm was mistaken for coldness. Your independence was labeled as indifference. Sound familiar? If it does, you've probably been in love while carrying the weight of someone else's insecurity. See, when you don't constantly seek validation, when you're not glued to your phone waiting for their reply, when your world doesn't collapse when they're not around, they start asking themselves, am I even needed? And when someone measures love by how much chaos you'd create without them, your balance becomes a threat. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "A man when he has done a good act does not call out for others to come and see, but he goes on to another act. As a vine goes on to produce again the grapes in season." You've been doing that, haven't you? Loving in silence, giving without demanding, healing yourself while holding others. But instead of feeling appreciated, you were told, you don't show enough emotion. Or worse, it feels like you don't even need me. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been made to feel guilty for not falling apart? Have you ever been told you were too okay? Like your emotional stability made someone feel unloved? If you have, then you already know the truth. Some people confuse drama with passion. They think love means chaos, jealousy, endless reassurance. But you found your center. You built your peace. You created a life that no longer spins out of control just because someone else walks out the door. And that's powerful, but it's also scary to the wrong person. Because when you don't need them to breathe, they feel like they don't matter. But listen carefully. Needing someone and choosing someone are not the same thing. And when you choose someone out of fullness, not emptiness, that's not a weakness. That's the purest kind of love. If someone walks away because you didn't cling to them, they weren't looking for love. They were looking for a lifeline, And you're not anyone's rescue boat. You're the ocean. So if your emotional independence made them feel unwanted, that wasn't your love story ending. That was your self-worth finally speaking up. And in the next part of this journey, we'll talk about something even deeper. Why your inner peace becomes a mirror for someone else's chaos. Don't go anywhere. Reason 6. Your inner peace mirrors their inner chaos. Have you ever been in love with someone whose world felt like a storm? While you had worked so hard to build your own calm, they were wild, unpredictable, intense. Their highs were euphoric. Their lows? Devastating. And you were the anchor. You didn't match their chaos, you grounded it. You didn't yell back and you listened. You didn't play games, you stayed steady. And at first they were drawn to you like a moth to flame. You calm me, they'd say. I feel safe with you. But over time, that calmness started making them uncomfortable, not because you changed, but because your peace began to reflect what they hadn't yet healed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." You had found that retreat. You had built it through heartbreak, through silence, through years of learning how to be okay, even when life wasn't. But to someone still drowning in their own chaos, your silence was too loud. Your steadiness was threatening. Your peace, instead of comforting them, reminded them of the war inside themselves. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like you were walking on eggshells just to keep someone from spiraling? Did you ever hold back your peace, your joy, just so they wouldn't feel left behind in their pain? Have you ever sat in a room with the person you loved most and felt like your presence made them more uneasy, not less? It's not because you did anything wrong. It's because sometimes, when you heal, you unconsciously hold up a mirror to someone who hasn't. And that mirror? It's painful for them. They see what they could be, what they want to be, but aren't yet. And instead of being inspired by your inner calm, they start to resent it. You become boring, distant, too perfect, not because you are, but because they don't know how to sit still with themselves. And you do. They lash out, pull away, or worse, start trying to disturb your peace, just to feel in control again. But here's what you need to remember. Your peace is not the problem. It's the proof of how far you've come. It's the result of the nights you cried alone, the mornings you showed up anyway, the days you chose healing over hurting others. You didn't get lucky. You earned that inner stillness. And if someone can't sit with it, if they need noise, chaos, and drama just to feel alive, that's not your responsibility to fix. You're not cold. You're not distant. You're just no longer vibrating on the frequency of emotional volatility. And that's growth. So if someone secretly hates you because your peace exposes their chaos, let them. That's not the end of love. That's the beginning of your freedom. And in the next part of this story, we'll explore the heartbreak of being misunderstood, and even when your heart is pure. Reason 7. You are often misunderstood, even when your heart is pure. Have you ever loved someone so genuinely, so deeply, that you thought they'd never question your heart? You gave your best. Not the polished, perfect version of yourself, but the real, raw, unfiltered you. You stayed up when they couldn't sleep. You sent those long, thoughtful texts when they felt off. You stayed, even when it hurt, because your heart wasn't looking for convenience. It was looking for connection. And still, they looked at you one day and asked, "Do you even care?" And just like that, your heart sank. Not because of what they said, but because of what it meant. They didn't see you. They didn't understand you. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And when your thoughts are full of love, compassion, and care, you expect that to be seen and not questioned. But not everyone speaks the same emotional language. You might show love in your silence. They expect it in loud declarations. You might give space as a sign of trust. They interpret it as distance. You might be building a future quietly, and they're panicking because you're not talking about it every second. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt unseen in a relationship even when you were giving your all? Have you ever tried to explain your intentions, only to be met with suspicion? That moment hurts, doesn't it? When you realize that the person you love is not arguing with your actions, they're fighting with the version of you they've created in their head, and suddenly you feel alone, even in their presence. The tragedy isn't just being misunderstood. It's being misunderstood by the one you trusted the most. You start to question yourself. Maybe I should have said more. Maybe I shouldn't have pulled back. Maybe if I loved them the way they wanted, they wouldn't doubt me. But here's what you must remember. You are not responsible for someone else's perception if you've moved with sincerity. Yes, reflect. Yes, grow. But don't dim your light just because someone else couldn't see it clearly. Sometimes, people hate you and not for your wrongs, but because your truth makes them uncomfortable, because you love differently, quietly, steadily, without drama, and they mistake that steadiness for apathy. They confuse still waters with shallow ones, but you know how deep your heart goes. If they couldn't understand that, it's not because your love was small, it's because their lens was fogged with fear, insecurity, or past wounds. Your heart is not something to decode, it's something to be felt. And if they couldn't feel it, truly feel it, and then maybe the story was never about losing them, but finally finding you. And in the next part of this journey, we'll dive into an even more painful realization: how your growth can be mistaken for arrogance, even by those you love. Reason 8. Your growth feels like arrogance to the ones who stayed the same. Have you ever looked back at the version of you from just a few years ago and barely recognized that person? Not because you regret them, but because you've grown so much since then. You used to tolerate more. You used to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You used to silence your own needs just to avoid an argument. But now you've changed. You don't settle for half love. You don't beg to be chosen. You don't apologize for taking up space. And yet somehow, the very people you thought would celebrate your growth now treat you like you've become too much. Too confident. Too independent. Too distant. They say things like, "You've changed. You act like you're better than everyone now. You used to be so down to earth." And it hurts, doesn't it? Because the truth is, you didn't grow out of humility. You grew out of survival mode. You started choosing yourself. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving you. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." And that's what you did. You stopped explaining. You stopped defending. You simply started being. But here's the painful truth. To people who are stuck, your movement looks like arrogance. To those who fear change, your progress feels like betrayal. Let me ask you something else. Have you ever loved someone who only knew the older version of you? The version who tolerated mistreatment. The version who stayed quiet just to keep the peace. The version who kept choosing love over self-respect? And when you finally evolved, when you finally stood up for yourself, they didn't cheer you on. They resented you. Because your growth made them uncomfortable. You reminded them of what they could be but aren't. You mirrored what they're afraid to face. You proved that healing is possible. And that's terrifying to someone who still blames the world for their wounds. So they pulled away. Or worse, they stayed and tried to drag you back down. But you kept rising. And that doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you aware. Aware of your value. Aware of your worth. Aware of the life you deserve. And the love that should match your energy. Not mute it. If someone can't celebrate your evolution, let them misunderstand you. Because the people meant for you won't fear your growth. They'll grow with you. And in the next part of this story, we're going to explore one of the most isolating feelings of all. What it means when your silence is mistaken for weakness. You're not going to want to miss that one. Reason 9. Your silence is mistaken for weakness. Have you ever sat in a room with someone you love and chosen not to speak? Not because you had nothing to say, but because you knew your silence would protect the peace? Have you ever walked away from an argument you could have easily won? Not because you were weak, but because you were tired of proving your worth to someone who should have already known it. If you've ever done that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. People think silence is surrender. They think that if you're quiet, you're afraid. If you don't clap back, you must be soft. If you walk away, you're running. But the truth? Sometimes silence is strength in its most misunderstood form. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." You could have raised your voice. You could have fought dirty. You could have exposed every lie, every scar, every broken promise. But you didn't. You chose restraint. You chose to let them underestimate you. You chose to stay grounded in a world that feeds on chaos. Let me ask you something deeper. Have you ever loved someone who mistook your stillness for apathy? Someone who said, "You don't care. You never react. You don't even fight for me. When in reality, you were fighting every day, just not in the way they wanted. You were fighting for balance, for peace, for sanity. You loved them so deeply that you swallowed your pride, your pain, your frustration, hoping your calmness would calm them. But it didn't. Because some people only recognize love when it's loud, when it's messy, when it's dramatic. And when you don't match that energy, when you choose stillness over storms, they assume you don't feel anything at all. But you do. Oh, you do. You just feel it differently. You feel it in your silence when they're yelling. You feel it in your still eyes when theirs are full of fire. You feel it when you choose to leave a conversation instead of burn everything down. That isn't weakness. That's emotional mastery. But to someone who's used to chaos, that control feels foreign. So they label you cold, uncaring, detached. And maybe that's the moment you realized they weren't in love with you. They were in love with who they thought you were. Someone they could control, someone who would lose themselves trying to save them. But you're not that person anymore. You've grown. You've risen. You've learned that not every battle needs your presence, and not every conversation deserves your voice. Because silence is where real power lives. If they misunderstood that, they let them. Because the one who sees you clearly will understand your quiet, feel your stillness, and recognize your silence not as absence, but as the deepest kind of strength. And now, as we come to the final part of this story, let's talk about how your very presence, your energy, can sometimes be too much for those who haven't yet found their own. You'll want to hear this. We're about to bring the story full circle. So what do we do with all this? Knowing these reasons helps, sure, but knowledge alone isn't enough. What matters is how you respond. You see, people's hatred, their whispers, their side eyes, their coldness, it's not an attack. It's an invitation. An invitation to grow stronger. An invitation to stay kind anyway. An invitation to live your truth without apology. The Stoic way is not to demand the world to love you. It's to love yourself so deeply, so fully, that the world's noise becomes background music to your symphony of peace. So next time you sense someone secretly hating you, smile gently, stand taller, walk forward. Their hate says more about them than it will ever say about you. And if you stay committed to your path, if you keep living with strength, compassion, and unshakable calm, you won't just survive their hate, you'll transcend it. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.